It's late January. Wind claws at the windows. Outside, the world is a sheet of ice and glass. Inside, your home hums with invisible systems. Furnace, refrigerator, water heater, Wi-Fi routers. All of it working so quietly, you almost forget they exist. Then, in a single breath, everything stops. The lights die. The hum disappears. Somewhere deep in the walls, the furnace gasps and goes still. At first, nothing seems urgent. You light a candle. You check your phone. Power outage, sure, but it's happened before. You assume it'll be back within the hour, but it doesn't come back. As the first evening thickens into night, the temperature begins to slide. Not dramatically, not yet. Just enough that you notice the chill stealing out from the windows, feel the hardwood floor biting at your feet. You throw on a hoodie. You tell yourself it's fine. By morning, your breath shows in the air. The pipes complain. The fridge is just a big, slowly warming box full of food that will soon go bad. Each room becomes another pocket of cold. Your home, designed for constant artificial warmth, reveals its true nature. Not a fortress against winter, but a thin shell that only works as long as machines keep feeding it energy. Now imagine the same storm, the same cold, but set your mind 800 years in the past. No electricity, no gas lines, no humming appliances. Just a small wooden house under a heavy roof, a smoke-darkened ceiling, and people who have never once expected any invisible system to save them. They knew from childhood that winter was not a minor inconvenience. It was a slow, patient predator that had to be outwitted every single day. And somehow, without thermostats or synthetic insulation, they didn't just endure it. They built their lives around it. We like to think of those people as helpless, always shivering, always one storm away from death. But that picture is only half complete. They were, in a very real sense, engineers of survival. They understood materials, temperature, food, and the body with an intimacy we've mostly traded away for convenience. What happens if one day we need that knowledge again? This is not a story about nostalgia. It's not an invitation to move into a hut and churn butter by hand. It's a map, a long, detailed map of how people once turned brutal winters into survivable seasons using only what they had around them. Not gadgets, not generators, not Amazon deliveries, just earth, wood, stone, fat, cloth, and an almost obsessive understanding of how they behave. If your world went dark for a month this winter, what would fail first? The answer for most modern people is simple: food, heat, and shelter. Not shelter in the sense of four walls and a roof. That part we have, but shelter that actually works when there's no invisible stream of energy pouring into it. Those three: food, heat, shelter, are the spine of this story. We're going to walk through a set of principles that medieval villagers used, knowingly or not, to survive winter after winter. You won't find brand names, survival gadgets, or miracle tools. You'll see something much more powerful. Systems where each decision supports 3 or 4 others at the same time. Systems that still work right now if you choose to use them. Principle 1. Storing sunlight. Winter doesn't begin with the first snow. Winter begins in summer. Every grain of wheat, every fat root, every animal that grazed in the pasture is a battery charged by sunlight. Medieval peasants understood this instinctively. When the last harvest wagon rolled into the yard and the fields turned from green to gray, they weren't just putting food away. They were doing math with their lives. They knew that for months the earth would offer almost nothing fresh. No supermarket trucks, no emergency relief vans, just what they had already taken from the land and what they could keep from rotting. Their solution was simple and brilliant. Change the food so decay has nowhere to live. They didn't have microscopes, but they understood that anything soft, wet, and exposed would rot. So they attacked water first. Grains were dried until they cracked between the teeth. Beans and peas were laid out in thin layers, turned and turned again, until the last whisper of moisture left them. Thick slices of apples, pears, and plums were hung high near the dark rafters, where stray warmth from the hearth would pass slowly over them day and night. Strips of meat, cut thin, were treated the same way, turning from red to deep brown as the weeks went by. They were, without knowing the term, building a pantry of dehydrated calories. Where we see snacks, they saw survival math. Dry food is light, dense, and stubborn. It refuses to rot quickly. It doesn't invite mold or maggots half as eagerly as fresh food does. Each linen sack of grain on the shelf was not just flour for bread. It was a number. This many days of porridge, this many loaves, this many mouths fed. Then there was salt, the other enemy of decay. Salt was not a seasoning. It was a weapon. Meat was rubbed with it, packed in it, soaked in it. Fish caught in autumn rivers were transformed from slippery, quick-spoiling bodies into stiff boards of preserved flesh that could hang in cool air for months. They didn't slice ham for sandwiches. They cut it into survival portions. A hunk of salted meat in a pot of boiled grains could turn a thin, weak porridge into a meal that repaired muscles and kept hands steady for work in the snow. Vegetables, too, were transformed. Cabbages were shredded, crushed with coarse salt, and pushed down into clay jars until the juices rose over them. After a few days, the taste changed, sharp, sour, alive. Without knowing words like bacteria or fermentation, they had learned that certain invisible partners could be invited in to protect the food against worse enemies. To them, a row of sealed crocks in the corner was not only pickle or kraut, it was armor against the hungry dead months. And then there were the places where the earth itself became part of the pantry. They dug into hillsides and beneath houses, carving out small chambers where the temperature hardly budged, no matter how vicious the wind became above. In those cool, quiet spaces, roots slept. Carrots, turnips, beets, thick-skinned apples, packed in layers of sand, straw, or dry leaves, kept from touching, kept from bruising one another. These were not luxury items. They were vitamins, minerals, variety. After months of eating grain and fat, a firm, still sweet carrot pulled from the earth in February might have been the difference between strength and illness. What did they measure? Not grams of protein on a label or calories in an app. They measured time. How long will this last us? How many days of heavy work can we get from this barrel? They learned which foods gave the most energy in the least volume. Nuts, dried meat, rendered fat. They tucked those high-density stores where mice and moisture couldn't reach. In a world where carrying firewood through waist-deep snow was part of daily life, food wasn't just about not starving. It was about having enough strength left to do it again tomorrow. You don't need a medieval village to apply this. Look at your kitchen right now and ask a simple question. If the power dies and trucks stop coming for a month, what food in this room will still be edible? Suddenly the freezer is useless. The fridge turns from friend to liability. What remains is what they learned to rely on: Dry, salted, fermented, and buried sunlight. The principle 2. Turning a house into a hearth. We tend to think of warmth as something we stand in front of. A vent, a radiator, a fireplace. Medieval villagers thought differently. For them, the goal wasn't a warm spot in a cold house. The goal was to turn the entire living space into a slow, stubborn reservoir of heat. Their houses were not airtight. Wind found the gaps. Smoke oozed through thatch. But they still managed to bend the physics in their favor. They started with the simplest furnace of all, the human body. You, right now, are a small heater that never quite turns off. Even when you lie still under a blanket, you're releasing warmth into the air. One person doesn't change much, but put several people together, close the gaps around them, and something interesting happens. Medieval families understood this long before anyone handed them a thermometer. Instead of each person retreating to a separate room, they slept close often in the same bed or on the same raised platform. Not just because houses were small, but because heat likes company. When you trap the breath and warmth of several bodies under layers of heavy fabric, you create a miniature climate inside that cocoon. Outside the blankets, the air might sting lungs and turn water to ice. Inside, cheeks flush, fingers thaw, and the night becomes bearable. They extended this thinking far beyond the mattress. Many houses in colder regions were built so that people and animals shared the same roof, even if they were separated by a wall or partition. To modern ears, that sounds miserable. To their ears, it sounded logical. A cow is not just milk and muscle. A cow is also a big living heater that eats hay and exhales warmth. Chickens, goats, sheep, all of them leak heat into the air. Put a thick wall between stalls and sleeping area. Keep the smells and filth confined, but let the warmth travel through wood and shared air. The result? A house that never quite sinks to the outside temperature, even when flames in the hearth die down. Then there was height. Cold air does not float. It crawls. It collects along floors and under door cracks. Medieval beds were rarely just pallets thrown onto the ground. They were lifted sometimes by a couple of feet, sometimes higher, creating a deliberate gap between sleepers and the coldest layers of air. Below the bed, they stacked straw, brush, or even spare wood. Not to store it, but to make the gap thick with trapped air. Above, they layered mattresses stuffed with straw, reeds, or wool, their own version of the modern insulation roll. Everything worked toward the same end. Keep bodies away from stone or frozen earth, surround them with materials that trap tiny pockets of air, and keep those pockets as still as possible. And because airflow matters, they used architecture in their favor. Low ceilings over sleeping areas, heavy curtains that could be drawn to shrink a big room into a smaller, warmer one. Alcoves built into thick walls, where beds could be enclosed or partially surrounded by wood. They weren't decorating. They were tuning the shape of their space to how heat behaves. The hearth itself, the open fire, was not just a place to cook. It was the heart of the thermal system. Its smoke blackened beams and stung eyes, but it also dried rafters, warmed hanging food, and heated stones and bricks that would continue to radiate long after the flames were embers. It wasn't efficient by modern standards, but they understood something we often ignore. The point of fire is not just immediate comfort. The point is to load heat into everything it touches so that when the fire is gone, warmth remains. If your heater failed tonight, how much of your home would stay warm by itself once the last flame died. Drywall and hollow stud walls don't store much heat. Thin carpets over concrete floors don't insulate much. Huge open rooms give cold air space to swirl and mix. We build houses as if heat will always be pumped in from somewhere else. They built houses that could be warmed and then left to cool slowly, buying them those extra crucial hours when the night was at its worst. In that difference in those hours, some families lived and others did not. Principle 3. Carrying heat without flame. At some point each night, the fire had to die. Wood was precious, axes dulled, backs ached. No one could afford to keep flames leaping purely for the comfort of orange light on the walls. Yet winter didn't care about their woodpile. The cold pushed in hardest in the long hours after midnight, when people were too tired to tend the hearth. So they learned to store fire, not as sparks in a lighter, not as an electric charge in a battery, but as heat hidden in stone and clay. Imagine a winter evening in a small village house. The day's work is done. Wet mittens hang near the smoke hood. A pot simmers with grains and scraps of meat. Beneath the pot, the fire is reduced now to a bright bed of coals, no longer roaring, but glowing with a steady, deeper heat. This is the moment the family begins charging their batteries. Flat river stones, bricks of baked clay, and chunks of dense rock sit near the fire's edge, warming slowly through the day. As evening comes, they are nudged closer, stacked carefully so they won't topple, turning darker as the heat soaks in. They would never have called it thermal mass, but that is exactly what they were building. Objects that resist quick change, that drink in heat while flames are cheap and release it when flames are gone. The children know to keep their hands back. Even a dull-looking stone can scald skin when it's been sitting in embers for hours. When it is time for bed, the adults use hooks, tongs, or thick wooden paddles to pull the hottest stones out of the coals and set them aside to cool just enough. Then comes the wrapping, not in thin cloth, which would scorch, but in layers. Wool, old blankets, folded rags. Each layer slows the rush of warmth outward, turning a brief burst of heat into a slow exhale that can last most of the night. One stone goes at the foot of the family bed, where it warms the place that chills first and worst, the feet. Another is slid between two sleeping children, wrapped enough that it cannot burn, close enough that their bellies and hands feel a gentle, steady warmth while they sleep. A smaller heated brick might be tied into a cloth and carried under a cloak by someone who has to step outside to check the animals or break ice on the water trough. They are not just carrying an object, they're carrying stored work, the effort of splitting, hauling, and burning wood turned into something portable. Stone doesn't care if the wind blows harder at 3 a.m. Once it's hot, it will surrender its warmth at its own pace, indifferent to weather. In a world where a gust could steal the heat from a fire in seconds, that kind of stubbornness was priceless. Modern homes have their own version of this idea without thinking about it. Thick masonry walls, tiled floors warmed by sun, water tanks that slowly cool overnight. All of them are quiet cousins of those wrapped stones. The difference is that medieval families interacted with the principle directly. They felt it in their hands. They passed those stones from parent to child, teaching with the simplest experiments. This rock holds heat. That one cracks. This tile stays warm. That one explodes if you put it too close to flame. Knowledge written not on paper, but in scars and successes. If the power died in your house tonight, what could act as a heat battery? Heavy pots, dense bricks, stacks of tile, even filled metal containers of water. All of them can soak up warmth when a fire or stove is running, then slowly share that warmth after flames go out. It's not magic. It's just patience, weight, and the way atoms move. The villagers didn't need numbers to believe it. Their proof was simple. Wake up in the darkest part of night, slide your feet toward the bundle at the bed's end, and feel the remnants of yesterday's fire easing the bite of today's cold. The fire went out. The warmth did not. Principle 4. Fire that sleeps. Instead of dyes for us, starting a flame is trivial. Flick a lighter, press a button, turn a dial, and listen to gas whisper into life. For them, making fire was labor. No one wanted to kneel on a hard floor, with numb fingers, striking steel against stone over and over while sparks bounced and died. No one wanted to coax a fragile thread of smoke into a flame with trembling breath in a room where you could see your own exhale. So they asked a simple question. What if the fire never truly goes out? They developed a habit learned from parents, practiced until it felt as natural as breathing, of putting the blaze to sleep instead of killing it. When the evening meal was done and the last kettle removed from the hook, the day's fire was allowed to burn down until only a deep bed of coals remained. The bright tongues of flame shrank, curled, and vanished. In the glow that remained, the real work began. With a poker or stout stick, they gently rake the embers into a single compact mound near the center of the hearth or stove. Every glowing fragment was pulled into that pile, made as dense as possible. Then came the blanket. Not a blanket of cloth burns, but a blanket of ash. All day, as wood burned, grey and white ash had been accumulating along the edges of the hearth. That ash, light as dust but soft as flour, became one of their most important tools. By day it was pushed aside. By night it was carefully sifted over the glowing mound. Handful by handful, the coals disappeared. First their shapes softened, then their brightness faded under the grey. One last breath of a red glow, then nothing but a low, dull warmth beneath a surface that looked cold. An outsider might think the fire was dead. The household knew better. Under that ash, starved of oxygen but well insulated, the coals smouldered all night at a slow, almost lazy pace. Instead of roaring for an hour and then going black, they stretched their life out through darkness and frost. In the morning, when work called and fingers needed warmth, someone would kneel by the hearth, push the ash aside with care, and find the living heart of the previous day's fire still glowing like a secret sunset. A twist of dry straw or splintered wood would be laid gently against that hibernating heat. Then, with lips close, a thin stream of breath steady, patient. Air fed the coal fed the wood woke into flame. Within moments, yesterday's fire was today's. No flint, no steel, no tedious striking, just a continuation. There is a deep lesson in that. The hardest part of many systems is not keeping them going, it's starting them. The villagers arranged their days to avoid repeated startups. Fire, once born, was encouraged to live as long as possible, even if only as a faint ember under ashes. In the same way, they tried not to empty their food stores completely, not to let water barrels go bone dry, not to strip forests bare. Restarting from zero is always harder than maintaining something that's merely quiet. Even in a modern home, the idea holds. During a prolonged outage, It isn't just about lighting a fire once. It's about designing your routine so that heat, once created, is never fully lost. Banking coals, closing off rooms, trapping daylight warmth behind curtains. These are all versions of the same attitude. Don't throw away what was hard to make. The ash itself in their world was never just waste. It scrubbed pots. It sweetened sour soil in the fields. Mixed properly with fat, it turned into a crude but effective soap. And at night, it was a guardian for their most precious tool. They did not have a fire the way we might talk about switching on the heat. They maintained a relationship with a living, temperamental element feeding it, calming it, letting it rest, waking it again. Fire demanded respect, but in return, it gave continuity. If your gas line stopped and your matches ran out, how confident would you feel that you could keep one flame alive for weeks? They built their lives assuming that question might decide the fate of everyone under their roof. The Principle 5, Wearing Your Shelter. Step outside into a snowstorm in a t-shirt, and your body will remind you very quickly that skin is not enough. We think of clothes as fashion or personal expression. For them, clothing was engineering portable architecture, designed to create a warm microclimate right against the body. They couldn't walk to a store and buy boots rated for negative temperatures. They had wool, linen, leather, fur, and animal fat. That was it. From those few materials, they assembled systems as sophisticated as any modern layering chart. Next to the skin, they wore linen. To someone raised in a hot climate city, that sounds absurd. Linen is summer fabric, light dresses and breezy shirts. But the people who spent hours each day hauling, cutting, and digging in the cold learned something different. Staying warm starts with staying dry. Sweat is a thief. It pulls heat from the skin as it evaporates. A laborer who wears the wrong fiber can soak through their shirt while working, then freeze when they stop. Linen, woven tight and worn soft from use, wicks moisture away more effectively than many heavier fabrics. It pulls dampness off the skin and spreads it through the cloth, where it can evaporate without directly chilling the body. Over that came wool. Wool was their miracle material. Not because it was fancy, but because it was forgiving. A woolen tunic traps countless tiny pockets of air in its fibers. Those pockets resist movement. Still air is warm air. Even when the outer surface gets damp from snow or sweat, the inner structure can keep insulating. Instead of one massive stiff garment, they often used many layers. A lighter wool shirt, a thicker over-tunic, maybe another sleeveless layer, all topped by a heavy cloak. Between each garment, a thin slice of air gets caught. Each slice adds one more barrier, a wall of stillness against the rushing cold. On legs, wool hose or wrapped cloth guarded thighs and calves. Over them, sometimes, came looser trousers or leg wrappings that broke the wind and kept snow from packing against skin. Feet were a constant battle. Leather alone is not a good insulator. But leather treated and maintained, combined with thick wool socks or felted liners, becomes a shell that keeps snow out while the inner fibers do the work of holding heat. One of their secrets was fat. They didn't have synthetic waterproof sprays. They had grease lard, tallow, oily scraps that would have been waste in a more delicate kitchen. Rubbing those into boots, mittens, and cloaks turned fibers darker, heavier, more resistant to water. Snow melted on impact, but instead of soaking in deep, it ran off, or at least stayed confined to outer layers. Hands, like feet, are fragile. Separate fingers bleed warmth quickly. That's why mittens were common. One shared pocket of air for all the fingers together, sometimes lined with softer fur on the inside, wool on the outside. Fine control was lost, but survival doesn't always require dexterity. It requires that you still have fingers in spring. Over the head and neck, everything came together. A hood can change a life in winter. Wrapped around the head, it shields the thin skin of ears and cheeks, slows the loss of heat through scalp and breath, and blocks the wind that can turn exposed skin numb in minutes. Many hoods extended over shoulders and upper chest, creating a little roof where warm air could collect. Taken together, all of these choices formed a single idea. Your first shelter travels with you. A poorly dressed person is like a house with no roof, no matter how well stocked their pantry might be. A well-dressed person, in contrast, can work outdoors for hours, come back inside tired but not frozen, and lie down with muscles that will recover instead of shivering themselves to exhaustion. Modern gear can do remarkable things, but many of the core rules are the same ones they learned by harsh, unforgiving experience. Don't let sweat stay on the skin. Trap air in many thin layers instead of one thick one. Guard the hands, feet, and head ruthlessly. Use whatever you have, grease, wax, tightly woven cloth, to keep water out of the layers that matter. Clothing for them was not an afterthought. It was the way they made sure that food and fire were enough. Without it, even the best hearth and the fullest pantry couldn't save you from a long walk through freezing wind. If you look at your own winter wardrobe through their eyes, the question changes from, "Is this stylish?" to, "If I had to spend half a day in the snow, hauling wood and tending animals, would this keep me functioning?" They answered that question with every stitch they sewed, every scrap of wool they turned into something warm, every worn-out garment they patched instead of throwing away. Their shelter began at the skin and extended outward from linen and wool, to cloaks and boots, to houses and barns, to snowbanks piled against walls. Nothing existed in isolation. Everything worked together. Principle 6, recruiting winter, instead of fighting it. To a modern homeowner, snow is an enemy. It clogs roads, freezes pipes, crushes roofs, traps cars, hides ice. We shovel it. We curse it. We try to push it away from everything we own. For medieval villagers living through ferocious winters, snow was not an enemy. Snow was insulation. Imagine the first true snowfall of the season. Thick, heavy flakes that fall without sound and pile against walls like cold wool. A modern instinct is to push it all away from the house. To them, that instinct would have been strange, almost foolish, because they saw what snow really is. Trapped air. Tiny pockets, countless millions of them, caught between frozen crystals. Air that can't move. Air that slows heat from escaping. Air that behaves in the right shape, like a thick blanket thrown around the walls. When the first serious snowfall came, families in the coldest climates worked outside with wooden paddles or shovels made from split logs. They didn't clear a perimeter, they built one. Against the north wall, the side that caught the bitter, needle-like winter winds, they heaped snow 2 or even 3 feet high. They packed it gently, not too tight, leaving the structure fluffy enough to trap air, but firm enough to hold shape. They shaped it with a slight outward lean, so that any meltwater would drip away from the wooden planks instead of soaking down into the foundation. The effect was immediate and measurable, though they didn't use numbers. They used breath and sensation. A wall that had once oozed cold like a stone now felt muted when touched from the inside. Drafts weakened. The house held warmth longer between hearth rakings. Fewer logs vanished into the fire. They understood a simple, powerful truth. It doesn't matter whether insulation is made by craftsmen or by clouds. What matters is whether it traps air. Snow, in the right form, was free insulation delivered by the sky. Some years were lean with little snowfall. But in years when the drifts came deep and heavy, they built their homes into semi-igloos, leaving only the doorway and windows clear and piling snow waist-high around the rest. They didn't brag about it. They didn't call it innovation. It was simply the way their grandparents had done it. Knowledge passed down in sentences like, "Leave the north wall thick." "Don't pack the snow too hard." "Keep the doorway clear." "Let the wind work for you, not against you." We think innovation requires metal tools, computers, and laboratories. But nature doesn't care about our technology. The same physics that insulate an Arctic fox's den also insulate a cottage when snow hugs it tight. Even today, in remote parts of the world, people still bank snow as windbreaks around barns and cabins when a severe storm is coming. Anyone who has slept in a snow cave knows winter's own material can be your ally, not your enemy. If your power went out on the coldest week of the year, would you see the snow outside your home as a threat or as something you could recruit? That question can change everything. Principle 7. Eating for heat, not just for hunger. In our world, food is often about pleasure. Flavor, convenience, routine. A bowl of soup because it feels cozy. A sandwich because it's quick. A salad because it's healthy. For them, food was physics. In winter, every bite mattered not just for strength, but for warmth. The body is not passive. It burns its fuel like a furnace, and certain fuels burn hotter than others. Medieval villagers didn't know calories, or macronutrient ratios, or metabolic thermogenesis, but they knew what every winter taught them. Fat keeps you alive when firewood runs low. Summer diets were lighter, more greens, fresh fruits, thinner broths, leaner meats. Winter diets changed completely. They became heavy, dense, oily, rich, not out of indulgence but necessity. A pot of beans simmered with pork fat became a staple. Broths thick with marrow were drunk greedily. Bread was fried in lard instead of eaten plain. Gruel was enriched with a thumb-sized lump of tallow that melted into warmth you could feel down to your fingertips. A modern person might find such food overwhelming, even unhealthy. But consider their life. Hours of physical labor in freezing air, constant exposure to wind, muscles burning through reserves, nights spent without central heating, days measured by work, not comfort. They needed calories. They needed fuel that burned long and slow. Fast sugars were useless. They sparked and faded. What mattered was endurance, warmth that blossomed inside the belly and stayed with them long after the fire dwindled. And fat, glorious fat, offered that. One spoonful of rendered lard held more energy than several handfuls of dried fruit. A slab of salt pork, heavily rationed, could transform a weak stew into something that carried a man through hauling timber in deep snow. Their bodies adapted. Their brown, fat, tiny biological furnaces inside the body switched on with relentless efficiency. Over generations, this became a seasonal rhythm. Summer was for growing and lightness. Winter was for burning and heaviness. Today, we separate nutrition from environment. They could not afford that. Food was shaped by season, work, and cold. A harsh winter demanded a different chemistry, and their bodies learned to obey it. Imagine standing outside in 20 degree past wind after eating a thin salad. Now imagine standing there after eating a dense, fatty stew that releases warmth for hours. One scenario invites shivers, the other gives strength. Medieval villagers didn't count macros, they counted survival. Their winter diet wasn't gluttony, it was insulation from the inside out. Principle 8. Fat as a multi-tool. We live in a world of product specialization. One cream for dry skin, one wax for boots, one oil for a pan, one polish for wood, one salve for frostbite, one candle for light. They used one substance for 7 different jobs. When an animal was slaughtered, nothing was wasted. Bones became broth, hides became leather, sinews became thread, organs became nourishment, and fat was treasure. Rendered slowly over hours, strained until clear, poured into crocks to cool. This fat became tallow or lard, depending on the animal. To them, it was a toolkit disguised as food. 1. Fuel for light. An ounce of tallow poured into a mold with a woven wick became a candle that burned through long winter evenings. Not cleanly, not sweetly. It smoked and smelled, but it lit the room, gave shape to shadows, let hands sew and mend long after sunset. 2. Food enrichment. A spoonful in a pot transformed a watery broth into a hearty meal. Applied to a pan, it kept food from sticking. Mixed into dough, it tenderized and enriched. 3. Leather waterproofing. Boots treated with fat repelled water better than untreated leather ever could. Gloves stiffened at first, then softened into a supple, water-resistant barrier. 4. Cloth. Weatherproofing. Wool cloaks brushed with tallow or lanolin turned snowflakes into droplets that rolled off instead of melting into the fibers. A treated cloak could resist hours of snowfall. 5. Skin protection. Cold wind dries skin until it cracks and bleeds. A thin layer of fat rubbed onto hands, cheeks, and lips created a protective coating. Not pleasant, not perfumed, but effective. 6. Lubricant for tools. Axes, hinges, sled runners, all moved more smoothly with a smear of fat. 7. Preservation of cooked meat, packed into jars and sealed under a layer of hardened fat, could last months. Even without salt, the fat created a perfect oxygen barrier. If a modern person carried a list of tools into the past candles, chapstick, waterproof spray, frying oil, hand cream, they would be carrying a basket full of items that peasants replaced with a single jar of tallow. Fat was not just food. It was a building material, a preservative, a treatment, a shield, and they valued it accordingly. Due pusat Principle 9, the grease layer as invisible armor. We wash casually today. We bathe daily, sometimes twice. We strip oils from our skin and replace them with lotions, often forgetting what those oils actually do. To a medieval villager, winter bathing was a luxury and a danger. It meant removing the single most important natural barrier they had, their skin's own oils. In winter, those oils thickened on the skin, forming a natural seal that slowed evaporative cooling. A clean, freshly scrubbed face might feel refreshing, but in the biting air of January, it meant exposure, and exposure meant frostburn. Shepherds learned this faster than anyone. Handling wool all day left their hands coated in lanolin, a waxy, faintly sticky fat that sheep produced to protect their own skin. Shepherds noticed that their lanolin-coated hands rarely cracked or bled, even in bitter cold. This observation spread to farmers, woodcutters, and hunters. Before heading into winter wind, many rubbed lard or tallow onto exposed areas, cheeks, hands, sometimes even the bridge of the nose. It wasn't grooming, it wasn't hygiene, it was armor. A way to keep the wind from stripping heat off skin faster than the body could replace it. In the harshest regions, people sometimes went weeks without full body washing, cleaning only what was necessary. This wasn't filth, it was strategy. The grease layer wasn't a failure of cleanliness, it was a conscious protection humans evolved for. Today, high-altitude mountaineers use similar strategies with petroleum jelly or specialized wind creams. The military issues barrier creams for extreme cold. The peasants found their version centuries ago. Nature gave them the materials. Experience taught them the application. Winter taught them the consequences of forgetting. Principle 10. Systems, not tricks. As we move through all these principles, stone radiators, ash-banked fires, snow insulation, fat-based waterproofing, it might seem like a long list of independent tricks. But that's not how they lived it. Their entire winter survival method was a system where every part supports the others. Clothes keep you warm enough to gather wood. Wood keeps the hearth burning. The hearth dries food and heats stones. Stones release heat slowly, reducing fuel needs. Reduced fuel needs mean fewer hours exposed outdoors. Snowbanks increase insulation, making every log last longer. Longer-lasting heat means more stable nights. Stable nights mean stronger bodies for day labor. Fat preserves food, waterproofs clothes, and warms the body. Preserved food reduces hunger when storms trap you indoors. Each piece interlocks. Each piece reinforces the next. In contrast, modern people tend to rely on one system only: electricity. When that system fails, the entire structure of comfort collapses at once. But for them, redundancy was life. Layer after layer, choice after choice, skill after skill. Winter did not allow shortcuts. It demanded systems. If you'd like, I can continue with Part 4, where we move into psychology of winter survival, how communities shared warmth, the role of animals, sickness and healing in winter, nighttime routines, and how these ancient systems can be applied today, continuing toward the full 20,000-word narrative. Вы сказали, продолжай, ChatGPT сказал, Part 4, The Night Mind, The Winter Mind, continuing the narrative, another 2,000 words. Principle 11, The Psychology of Darkness. Winter wasn't just cold, it was long. Today, we push a switch and defeat darkness instantly. Streetlights glow. Screens shimmer. Our homes are filled with soft, warm radiance. But medieval winter nights were thick, heavy, almost physical things. Darkness owned half the year. From late afternoon until morning's first pale blue smear on the horizon, the world belonged to shadows and silence, and people learned to survive that too. When the sun dipped, families gathered near the hearth, not only for warmth, but for mind and spirit. The fire wasn't just fuel. It was company, protection, and comfort. Its glow softened the edges of fear. Crackling embers set a rhythm that soothed the mind like a heartbeat. They talked. They sang old songs. They mended harnesses, patched clothes, told stories that had traveled through generations unchanged. In those stories were warnings, lessons, memories. A tale about a wolf in the dark taught a child to respect the night. A legend about a foolish farmer who burned too much wood too soon taught restraint. Without chalkboards or textbooks, winter nights were their school. And beyond stories, there was silence. Deep silence. The kind of quiet we rarely hear anymore, the kind that expands the mind, forces introspection, sharpens senses. In that darkness, people learned patience. Winter was not something you rushed through. There were no electric clocks to divide time into strict units. The hours were shaped by firelight, not numbers. Those who fought the season mentally resenting the cold, fearing the dark suffered most. Those who accepted it, moved with it, shaped their days around its rhythms, endured with greater strength. Modern psychology confirms something they knew instinctively. The mind's relationship with winter influences the body's ability to survive it. Fear consumes energy. Anxiety amplifies cold. Calm preserves strength. Medieval villagers didn't conceive these ideas scientifically. They learned them through living, and through the simple truth winter made unavoidable. A peaceful mind conserves firewood better than any stove. Where we fret about days being unproductive, they understood that winter had its own purpose: to slow down, to repair, to prepare, to endure. Accepting that rhythm was a survival skill in its own right. Principle 12. Community as a heating system. In modern life, each household fights winter alone. But medieval winter was never survived individually. Villagers supported each other in subtle but powerful ways. 1. Shared labor. Cutting wood alone is exhausting. Cutting wood as a group becomes efficient. One family might own a woodlot. Another might have older children strong enough to haul logs. Another might have a good axe or saw. They cooperated, traded, and shared in ways that were mutually beneficial. One day's shared work could save 3 or 4 days of solo labor. 2. Shared heat. Not every home had the same insulation, structure, or resources. But when a blizzard came and winds screamed through the cracks of a poorly built cottage, those who lived in sturdier, better insulated houses took in neighbors. Entire families might sleep shoulder to shoulder on floors and benches, wrapped in layered blankets, benefiting from the cumulative body heat. It wasn't charity, it was mutual survival. Warmth shared is warmth multiplied. 3. Shared food. A cow that still gave milk in winter helped more than one household. A pig slaughtered in late autumn meant fatty meat for multiple families. A successful hunt meant distributing precious calories. In the dead of winter, generosity was not optional. It was a collective insurance policy. 4. Communal knowledge skills were taught freely because hoarded knowledge killed. A grandmother might show a young mother how to bank a fire properly. A father might teach a neighbor's son how to check livestock for cold weather illness. A hunter might explain which dried herbs to boil for a sick child. This wasn't charity either. Knowledge shared strengthened the village, and a strong village protected everyone. In a crisis fire, sickness, injury, storm, no one had the luxury of isolation. The psychology of "we face this together" was as important as every cloak, shovel, and log. Modern survival often romanticizes individual toughness, but medieval peasants had a quieter, deeper understanding. The strongest winter shelter is a community. The Principle 13. Animals as partners in survival. It's easy to forget, in our world of pet beds and fenced lawns, that animals were once woven into the architecture of winter survival. Not above humans, not beneath beside. A medieval winter home often sheltered cows, sheep, goats, chickens, sometimes pigs, but not in a chaotic barnyard. Everything had purpose. 1. Heat production. We already saw how a cow could act as a 500-watt heater. Multiply that by a small herd, and you begin to understand the warmth that seeped through walls and floors. The animals did not share sleeping areas with humans directly. That would have been unsanitary, but proximity mattered. A stable attached to a house provided warmth through sheer biology. Humans fed animals. Animals fed the house with heat. Heat fed survival. 2. Predictable daily rhythm. Animals must be tended. They must be watered, fed, cleaned, checked. They cannot be ignored. This gave villagers something modern. People often lose in winter: purpose, a reason to rise at dawn, a reason to move, stretch muscles, breathe cold air, a reason to keep the hearth warm. Routine fights despair. Routine fights lethargy. Routine sustains life. 3. Fresh resources in a frozen world. Eggs in winter are gold. Milk, even a small amount, provides calories and fat. Wool grows even during cold months. Manure enriches soil when spring returns. Nature does not pause in winter, and neither did their partnership with it. 4. Early warning system animals feel cold differently than humans. They become restless, loud, uncomfortable. A sleepless cow or flock of uneasy sheep could alert a household to a failing fire, a draught, a coming storm, or wolves moving in the night. The barn was not separate from the home. It was a living alarm system, a breathing heater, and a food reserve embedded directly into the family's survival network. In a world where humans sometimes had only embers to cling to, animals provided a warm anchor. The Principle 14. Medicine for the winter months. Winter didn't only bring cold, it brought sickness. Without refrigeration and modern hygiene, winter illnesses, respiratory infections, fevers, frostbite, infections were threatening. But villagers were not helpless. They had a rich knowledge of herbs, roots, and simple treatments. Some examples. 1. Hot stone. Compresses stones heated near the hearth and wrapped in cloth became treatments for muscle pain, lung congestion, stomach cramps. Placed against the chest, a warm stone was the ancient version of a heating pad. 2. Steam from boiled herbs. Mint, thyme, juniper, and pine needles were boiled in pots. The steam cleared airways and eased breathing. Children were encouraged to inhale it under blankets. They didn't know the word antimicrobial, but they saw results. 3. Honey as medicine. Honey was applied to wounds because it prevented infection. It soothed sore throats. It boosted calories for the sick. A beehive was not a luxury, it was a pharmacy. 4. Animal fats for healing. We think of ointments in tubes. They thought of tallow thickened with herbs. Mixed with beeswax, it became a salve for cracked skin, frostbite, and windburn. 5. Sleeping in warmth. The sick slept closest to the hearth. Not for comfort, to avoid pneumonia, the silent killer of winter. People didn't battle cold alone, and they didn't battle sickness alone. The entire household rearranged itself around illness, providing warmth, broth, and constant care. In modern times, we have medicine cabinets. They had knowledge, fire, and vigilance. Different tools, same purpose. To Principle 15. The Night Ritual, Securing the Darkness. When the last tasks of the day were done and darkness thickened, families prepared for the night as carefully as soldiers preparing for a cold camp. Their nighttime routine was a set of practiced, essential steps. 1. Bank the fire. We've already explored this, but it was the cornerstone. The fire needed to sleep safely. 2. Seal the house wooden shutters closed tightly. Draft-stopping cloth pushed against cracks. A curtain drawn across the main door. Even the smallest gap mattered. 3. Prepare the heat stones. Wrapped stones placed in the bed. sometimes replaced halfway through the night. 4. Check the animals. A tense, restless animal meant drafts, predators, or freezing water troughs. 5. Place the water pot. A pot of water kept near the fire served 2 purposes. As an indicator, if it froze, the house was dangerously cold. As an emergency, if sparks flared, water could stop a fire. 6. Arrange the sleeping order children in the middle. Elders on the warmer side, adults on the edges, forming a barrier of heat. 7. Final story or prayer. Not superstition stability. Humans need rhythm. Children need reassurance. Adults need psychological grounding. These rituals reflected a deep truth. The house can help you survive the night only if you prepare it to. Winter respected no one, but it could be managed. The Principle 16. What this means for us today. At this point in our journey, you might feel a quiet shift happening inside you. Not nostalgia, not fantasy, recognition. Winter has not changed. Only we have. We've forgotten how to see our homes as systems. We've forgotten how to partner with nature. We've forgotten that warmth is something you can design, not just buy. But that knowledge is not lost. It's here embedded in every trick, habit, and method medieval villagers used to keep their children alive through long, merciless seasons. And that's why this story matters, because even today, a storm can knock out power, a blizzard can shut down roads, a cold snap can break heating systems, a natural disaster can isolate neighborhoods, a disrupted supply chain can empty grocery stores. When systems fail, skills return to being more valuable than machines. You do not need to become a medieval farmer to benefit from these principles. You only need to understand them, use them, adapt them. You can create a home that stays warm longer, clothing that protects better, food that lasts without electricity, routines that calm the mind, cooperation that strengthens community, all using simple principles that have stood the test of centuries. The first storm came early that year, long before the last apples were dried on the rafters. Before the final sacks of barley were carried into the storehouse, before the geese had finished their slow southbound drift across the sky, winter announced itself with a roar. It came in a single night, one moment. The village of Ashford breathed the damp, earthy scent of late autumn, and the next, the world vanished behind a wall of white. Elara woke to the sound of the wind hammering the shutters. The little window above her bed trembled, its wooden frame groaning as gusts clawed at the house as if trying to tear it apart. For a few seconds she lay still, listening. The storm sounded like a living thing, hungry, restless, relentless. "Too soon," she whispered to herself. Her grandmother, Mara, stirred beside her on the raised sleeping platform, pulling the heavy wool blanket closer up her shoulders. Even in sleep, her breath came soft and shallow, a rhythmic wheeze that worried Elara more than she liked to admit. Winters were hard on the old, and this winter, arriving weeks ahead of schedule, would be hardest of all. Elara rose quietly, careful not to wake her. The air inside the cottage was already cold enough to mist her breath. The fire had burned down to embers during the night, but a faint glow hid beneath the ash. She wrapped a wool shawl around herself, padded across the floor, and knelt beside the hearth. She pushed ash aside until she uncovered the living coal. Still warm, still red, good. She breathed gently, coaxing it back to life. A few sparks leapt upward. The ember brightened. She set a pinch of dry tinder against it. One more breath steady, warm, patient. The tinder caught. Flames bloomed like tiny flowers in the dark. Light filled the cottage again, soft, golden, bringing warmth not just to the skin, but to the heart. Behind her, Mara's voice rasped through the dimness. "You always were a gentle blower," the old woman said. "Not like your father. He'd nearly spit his lungs out trying to force a fire awake." Ilara smiled. "Someone had to keep the coals from giving up on us." Mara shifted, pulling herself upright. Her hair, once dark as ravens, was now a waterfall of silver, braided loosely. She wrapped her own shawl closer and peered toward the door. "It's early," she said. "I know. And the wind has teeth." "I know that too." Mara sighed, a slow, deep exhale of resignation and memory. "This will be the winter that tests us." Ilara didn't answer. She didn't need to. They both understood. Or the village under snow. By midday, Ashford was a different world. Snow covered the ground so deeply that fences vanished beneath it. Roofs sagged under the sudden weight. The well's stone rim had become a smooth white mound. People moved through the storm like ghosts hooded, muffled, bent forward as they trudged from house to barn. Ilara made her way to the goat shelter, leaning into the wind that kept trying to shove her sideways. Snowflakes stung her face like pinpricks. Her boots, hardened and waterproofed with tallow, sank 6 inches with every step. The goats bleated anxiously when she opened the door. Warm breath curled in the air. The animals shifted restlessly, hooves tapping the straw. She counted them, 1, 2, 3, 4, then checked the newborn kid nestled against its mother. Still alive, still shivering, but alive. She refilled the trough with water, breaking the thin layer of ice forming at the edges. Then she spread extra straw, letting the goats bury themselves in it. "Stay warm," she whispered, giving the nearest goat a scratch behind the ears. The goat leaned into her hand, grateful for the touch. Animals felt changes in weather more keenly than people did. Every muscle in their bodies told them what the sky intended. She closed the barn door behind her, securing it with a wooden bar. The blizzard swallowed her immediately. A village meeting. By evening, the storm still hadn't eased. Snow rose in drifts taller than a grown man. The villagers gathered inside the longhouse, the only building spacious enough for all of them, its walls glowing from the fire pit in the center. The atmosphere was tense. People leaned close to one another for warmth. They spoke in low voices, afraid to draw the storm's attention, as if winter itself might be listening. Joren, the village warden, stood near the fire. He was a broad-shouldered man with a beard thick enough to hide small animals in. He raised his voice above the low murmur. "This storm is not like last year's early snow," he said. "It's deeper, heavier. If it keeps up like this, some roofs may not hold." A few gasps rippled through the crowd. "We've enough wood for 2 weeks, assuming weather stays normal," another villager said. "But it won't," Mara said, stepping forward despite her age. "This winter will run long, longer than you expect. I've seen a storm like this before." Ilara placed a hand on her grandmother's arm for support. "When?" Joren asked. 60 years past," Mara said, her voice steady despite her frail frame. "We called it the Winter of 3 Lanterns. Snow buried the fields until spring's 2nd month. People lost livestock. Some lost homes. We kept going because we remembered what our grandparents taught." "And what was that?" Ilara asked quietly. Mara lifted her chin. "That's survival," she said. is not the strength of one household, but the strength of all together." The villagers fell silent. "Joran," she continued, "you'll need to organize snow banking. The young men should pack drifts against the north walls to insulate them, and every family must share heatstones. No one can rely only on their own hearth." A few villagers shifted uneasily. Sharing resources was logical, but hard. "And food?" someone asked. "The harvest was light," another added. "Which is why we must ration," Mara said. "Every family contributes to the communal store. We dine together in the longhouse once a day. It saves wood, it saves labor, it saves lives." This was radical, but in her voice was the weight of decades, of winters survived and winters mourned. Joran nodded. "Mara speaks truth. We'll do it." Reluctantly, the villagers agreed. Outside, the storm snarled against the walls, but inside, a different warmth flickered, a fragile flame of unity. The nights of cold and whispered stories. Back in their cottage, Ilara and Mara prepared for night. They heated stones in the hearth until they glowed faintly, then wrapped them in wool and tucked them beneath the straw-stuffed mattress. The air inside the house settled into a warm haze. Shadows from the lantern danced on the wooden beams. Mara lay down first, her bones stiff. Ilara climbed beside her and pulled the blankets over both of them. The wind whistled through tiny gaps in the walls, but the snowbank outside dulled its bite. Still, the cold crept in, determined, eager. "Tell me," Ilara said softly, "about the Winter of 3 Lanterns. You've never spoken of it fully." Mara's eyes drifted to the fire. "I was 6, she said, too young to understand fear, old enough to feel hunger." "Was it like this storm?" "No." Her voice dropped. "It was worse. The snow came down for 30 days without rest. We had so little food we ate boiled bark and moss soup. My father broke both legs clearing a collapsed roof. He never healed right." Ilara felt a shiver, not from cold. "But," Mara continued, "every night our neighbors came. One family brought a lantern, another brought broth, another brought wool blankets. 3 lanterns, bright like stars in our little house. Without them, we would have died." She closed her eyes. "Remember this, Ilara. Winter is not survived alone. Those who close their doors to others freeze behind them." Ilara squeezed her grandmother's hand. "I won't forget." A visitor in the night. Sometime past midnight, Ilara awoke to a faint sound, a rhythmic thump against the outer wall. At first, she thought it was the storm. Thump. Pause. Thump. Pause. Then a muffled voice, weak, strained. "Ilara!" Her heart seized. She threw off the blankets, grabbed a wool cloak, and rushed to the door. When she pulled it open, a blast of snow and wind hit her like a wall. Through the white, a shape leaned against the cottage, half buried, barely able to stand. It was Bren, the miller's son. No cloak, no gloves, no hat. His lips were blue. He collapsed into her arms. "Ilara," he whispered again. "Please." She dragged him inside with a burst of strength, fueled by pure instinct. Snow fell from his clothing in clumps. His fingers were stiff and colorless. Mara startled awake, seeing what was happening. "Close the door!" she cried. "Quickly!" Ilara shoved it shut, sealing out the icy wind. "Put him near the fire," Mara ordered, instantly wide awake despite her age. "Warm the stones again. Fetch the wool." Ilara moved with desperate speed. The hearth still glowed faintly, thank the gods. She added thin sticks, breathed life into the coals, lit new flame. Heat grew, spreading. Bren shivered violently, good sign. The body fought for life, only when it still had something to fight with. "What happened?" Elara asked, kneeling beside him. He tried to speak, teeth chattering. "Roof. Caved. Mother trapped. Father went for help. No one came." His voice cracked. Elara exchanged a terrified glance with Mara. The storm had swallowed someone's home, and if the roof was down, there might be no time. The decision at dawn. Bren slept fitfully through the remaining night, wrapped in blankets and heated stones. Elara and Mara did not sleep at all. They fed him broth, rubbed tallow onto his frozen fingers, and coaxed warmth back into his limbs. Slowly, painfully, his color returned. But when dawn finally bled faint light into the world, he opened his eyes and whispered the words Elara had dreaded. "They think my mother is still alive." Mara's jaw tightened. "Elara," she said, "you must go to Joran." Elara hesitated only a moment. The wind had softened, but the world outside was still buried in white. Snowdrifts rose like cliffs. The cold was sharp enough to bite through wool. The path to the longhouse would be treacherous, but leaving someone trapped beneath a collapsed roof? That was unthinkable. "I'll go," Elara said. Mara gripped her hand. "Move quickly, and take a stone." Elara wrapped a small heated stone in cloth and tucked it beneath her cloak. It would keep her core warm for hours. She pulled on her boots, fastened her thickest wool hood, and stepped into the snow. Ahead lay danger, uncertainty, and the first test of a winter that had come too soon. Behind her, the hearth glowed steadily, a promise of warmth, a memory of wisdom, a reminder that no one survived winter alone. The moment Elara stepped outside, the cold struck her like a physical blow. Not the sharp, playful sting of ordinary winter, but a deep, bruising cold that seemed to creep through cloth, through skin, through bone, all the way into the marrow. The snow beneath her boots groaned with every step, dense, heavy, unforgiving. The world was colorless. White land, white air, white sky. Even the trees were buried to their lower branches, their dark limbs clawing upward like desperate hands. Elara pulled her hood tighter and pressed the warm stone closer to her stomach. Its heat radiated outward in slow waves, a pocket of life in an otherwise frozen wilderness. She set out toward the longhouse, moving as quickly as she dared. The longhouse under siege. The longhouse rose out of the storm like a ship trapped in a frozen ocean. Snow had piled so deeply along the walls that only the roof and the upper beams were clearly visible. Lantern light glowed faintly from the upper windows, muted by thick frost. Elara fought her way through a waist-high drift and pounded on the door. It opened after a moment, releasing a wash of warm air and the smell of broth. Joran stood in the entryway, his face shadowed with worry even before he recognized her. "Elara, what in the gods' names are you doing out in this?" "It's Bren," she gasped. "We found him outside our cottage last night. His family's roof collapsed. His mother may still be alive." A hush fell over the room behind Joran. Several villagers frozen mid-movement stared at her. "How long ago?" Joran asked immediately, stepping aside so she could enter. "Last night," Elara said. "He barely made it to us. He said his father went for help, but no one came." Joran cursed under his breath. The villagers had been overwhelmed. 3 barns roofed with heavy snow. 2 families snowed in. 1 horse found frozen by morning. Everyone was fighting their own disasters. In the chaos, the miller's family had been forgotten. No blame, just reality. Joren grabbed his cloak from a wooden peg. "We'll need at least 5 strong arms, and shovels, ropes, too." Thomas, a broad-faced farmer, stood up. "I'll come." "So will I," said Mira, the blacksmith's daughter, a girl thin as a reed but strong as iron nails. 2 more volunteered, but then Ingrid stooped, grey-eyed, sharp-tongued, stepped forward. "No," she said firmly, "not like this." Joren frowned. "What do you mean?" "You'll sink to your waists before you reach the mill," Ingrid said. "Storm's easing, but that snow is deep and wet. You'll exhaust yourselves before you dig even a finger's length." "Then what do you suggest?" someone asked. Ingrid lifted her chin. "Snowshoes." A murmur circled through the longhouse. Snowshoes, woven wooden frames laced with strips of hide, hadn't been used in Ashford for years. The winters had been mild enough that people forgot how to move across deep drifts. "I can make them," Ingrid said. "I still remember how." Joren nodded. "Do it fast." More villagers stood to help. Wood was fetched. Strips of rawhide were thawed by the hearth. Ingrid's gnarled fingers guided younger hands while she instructed, "No gaps. Tight weave. The snow must be tricked into thinking you're bigger than you are." Ilara watched, heart hammering, as the shoes took shape. The room pulsed with urgency. Within an hour, an astonishing 5 pairs were ready. Joren strapped his on first and tested them with careful steps. They held. "We move now," he said. "Ilara, lead us to the path you came through." Ilara grabbed her cloak, tightened the belt around her waist, and stepped outside again, this time with 5 towering figures behind her, each carrying a shovel and the determination of men marching into danger. What would the path to the miller's house? The mill sat on the far edge of the village, where the river curved through thick woodland. The path normally took 10 minutes. In this weather, it took more than an hour. Snowshoes carried them over drifts that would have swallowed them whole. Each step was an art press, shift weight, glide. Ilara had never used them before, but she copied Joren carefully. Her legs burned, her lungs screamed, but she pressed on. Trees appeared through the storm like black skeletons. Their branches bowed under the weight of ice. Somewhere far off, a raven croaked, its voice muffled by the snow. At last, the mill rose before them, or what remained of it. The roof had caved inward. The weight of snow had snapped the beams like dry bones. The upper floor had fallen, crushing the grinding stone room. Only the far corner where the living space was remained partially intact, though the walls sagged uneasily. Ilara felt her heart drop. "Mara was right," Tomas whispered. "This storm, it's the kind that tests us." Joren raised his hands. "No fear. We work. Fast, but careful." They approached the wreckage. A faint sound drifted from inside. A cough. Ilara froze, then sprinted toward it. Joren caught her arm just in time to stop her from plunging into a hidden hole where the floor had collapsed. "Careful!" he barked. "We don't lose 2 lives today." He guided her back, then began probing the snow with the butt of his shovel, tapping for hollow spaces. The others followed suit. After a moment, Thomas shouted, "Here! There's a pocket under this drift!" All 5 rushed over, shovels slicing through snow. The wind howled around them, tugging at cloaks and flinging icy flakes into their eyes. Minutes passed. Then, "Ilara," came a weak voice, from beneath the wreckage. Ilara's breath caught in her chest. "Mrs. Hale," she called. "Hold on, we're coming." "We must cut through the roof," Joren said. Together, they dug until the broken beams emerged, twisted and splintered under white weight. Mira and Thomas heaved one beam aside. Joran wedged his shovel under another and used it as a lever. The wood groaned. Snow spilled inward. "Again!" he shouted. They pushed, pulled, lifted. The beam shifted, then rolled aside enough for a small opening to appear. A hand emerged, thin, trembling, coated in dust. Ilara fell to her knees and grasped it. "I've got you!" The villagers widened the opening until Mrs. Halebren's mother was visible. Her face was pale, her lips cracked, but she was alive. They pulled her free. As soon as she felt Ilara's arms around her, she began to cry, a small, broken sound swallowed by the winter wind. "My boy! Is he—" "He's alive," Ilara said. "He's with my grandmother. Safe." Mrs. Hale sobbed with relief. But the moment of victory lasted only seconds. A sharp crack split the air. Everyone looked up. The remaining corner of the mill was sagging dangerously. The weight of snow had shifted. The structure shuddered. "We have to move!" Joran shouted. "Now!" Tomas grabbed Mrs. Hale. Mira took her other arm. They hurried away from the building as another crack rang out, louder this time. "Faster!" Mira urged. They reached safer ground. Just as the last standing wall of the mill collapsed with a thunderous crash, sending plumes of snow billowing into the air. For a long moment, none of them spoke. They simply watched the ruins settle under the storm, a grave for what once had been a home. Mrs. Hale buried her face in her hands. Ilara placed a hand on her shoulder. "You're safe now," she said, "and Bren is waiting." The woman nodded shakily. The long walk home. The journey back was slower. Mrs. Hale could barely walk. The wind had picked up again, and exhaustion weighed on everyone like iron. Joran ordered rotations, 2 people supporting Mrs. Hale at a time while the others broke a trail. As they neared the village, the storm finally began to weaken. The air cleared just enough to reveal rooftops poking through the snow like half-buried islands. And when they reached Ashford's edge, something unexpected happened. People were waiting for them. Villagers had gathered outside the longhouse, children bundled in cloaks, men leaning on shovels, women carrying blankets. When they saw Mrs. Hale being carried through the snow, a cheer rose, not loud, not triumphant, but relieved. Hands reached out to help. Blankets were draped over Mrs. Hale's shoulders. Someone ran to fetch warm broth. Someone else brought heated stones. Mara stood near the front, leaning on her cane. When she saw Ilara, her stern expression softened into unmistakable pride. "You brought her home," Mara said. "We all did," Ilara replied. "No," her grandmother insisted quietly. "You were the first to step into the storm. Sometimes that is everything." Mrs. Hale was taken into the longhouse, placed near the fire, and tended by 6 caring hands. As warmth returned to her body, she whispered, "Bless you all. You saved me." Joran looked around at the villagers' gathered faces, tired, clothes soaked, eyes shining with relief. "This," he said loudly, "is how we survive the winter." And for the first time since the storm began, hope flickered, small, fragile, but real. Ilara's quiet moment. After the rescue, Ilara finally returned home. Bren slept peacefully on their sleeping platform, his colour much improved. Mara sat beside him, knitting silently, the firelight catching the silver in her hair. Ilara removed her cloak and hung it near the hearth to dry. Snow melted into tiny rivulets, dripping onto the stone floor. "You did well today," Mara said without looking up. Ilara sat beside her. suddenly aware of how exhausted she was. "I felt like I couldn't breathe," Ilara admitted. "The snow, it was everywhere. And when I saw the mill—" "Fear keeps you alive," Mara said, "but courage keeps others alive." Ilara leaned her head against her grandmother's shoulder. "Is this what the Winter of 3 Lanterns was like?" she asked. Mara nodded slowly. "Yes, and this is only the beginning." Ilara closed her eyes. She knew Mara was right. This winter had already taken too much, and it would demand more. But now something had changed. The village had acted as one. People had shared warmth. Skills long forgotten had returned. And Ilara had felt, for the first time, that she was part of something larger than fear. Something stronger. She opened her eyes and looked at the sleeping boy, the glowing hearth, her grandmother's steady hands. "We'll make it," Ilara whispered. Mara smiled faintly. "Yes," she said, "because we must." The storm did not end so much as it shifted. For 3 days after the rescue, snow continued to fall, but not with the violence of that first night. Instead, it drifted down steadily, endlessly, like a silent, unbroken thought. The world softened under its accumulating weight. Paths vanished, fences disappeared. The familiar outlines of Ashford blurred beneath white curves and ridges. People moved like tunnel dwellers, carving narrow corridors through the drifts between their cottages and the longhouse. Smoke rose from chimneys only during certain hours. Fuel had to be rationed now, giving the village an eerie, quiet appearance, as if it held its breath. Inside Ilara's home, the smell of broth simmering filled the air. Mara stirred the pot, her movements slow but steady. Bren, still wrapped in blankets, sat near the hearth, recovering strength day by day. "Ilara," Bren said cautiously, "I can help today. I can shovel or carry wood something." Ilara, sitting beside him mending a tear in her cloak, looked up. "You can barely walk to the door without wobbling," she said. He blushed, embarrassed. "I'm stronger now." "You're alive because you ran through a storm no one else dared step into," she said. "Recovering isn't weakness. It's survival." Bren opened his mouth to argue, but Mara turned from the pot and gave him a single look. A look forged from 80 winters of dealing with stubborn villagers. "Eat first," Mara ordered. "Then speak." Bren closed his mouth again. The village adapts. By the 4th day, the storm finally eased. The sky remained heavy and grey, but the wind quieted, leaving Ashford wrapped in fragile stillness. Joren sent runners door to door. "All families gather in the longhouse at midday. Bring your ration logs." Ilara bundled herself in layers, linen, wool, cloak, and helped Bren do the same. He insisted on walking there himself. She didn't argue. Pride was a strange medicine, but sometimes necessary. Inside the longhouse, villagers sat shoulder to shoulder on benches, stamping snow off boots. A fire burned low at the center, surrounded by stones that had been heating since dawn. The air smelled of damp wool and smoke. Joren stood at the front, flanked by Ingrid and Mira. He held a carved wooden ledger. "Listen well," he said. "The blizzard has cut us off from the southern road. The east trail is buried. The river is frozen solid. We must assume we are alone until spring." No one spoke. "We will survive," he continued, "if we plan, if we ration, if we use the old ways." Ingrid stepped forward. "We will eat together once a day. The communal fire uses far less wood than many smaller fires in homes. Save your fuel for mornings and nights." Mira lifted a basket of tallow candles. Light must be used carefully. No more than 1 candle per household at once. Use oil lamps only for mending or cooking. Then Joran opened the ledger. We begin with food counts. One by one, families came forward. The bakers, 3 sacks of barley, 2 of oats, 1 crate of apples, half a pig salted. The shepherds, dried meat from 3 sheep, 6 wheels of cheese, 2 crocks of sauerkraut. The coopers, root vegetables, several jars of honey, a barrel of dried peas. When it was Mara and Ilara's turn, Ilara stepped forward. We have 1 sack of barley, 2 small crocks of cabbage, dried apples, goat milk when the weather allows, and enough tallow for the winter. Joran nodded. And goats, important. As counts filled the ledger, a picture emerged. The village had enough food barely if they rationed. If no more storms came, if no sickness spread, if no wolves descended from the hills, the word if hung over the room like frost. But the first signs of trouble. That night, as Ilara returned home, she noticed something strange. The goats were restless, not bleating fearfully, just pacing, shifting, sniffing the air. Animals understood storms better than humans. They also understood danger. Easy, Ilara whispered, brushing the nearest goat's neck. You're safe. But the goat's ears flicked toward the forest. Their bodies were tense. She frowned. Later, after Bren had fallen asleep and Mara dozed beside the fire, Ilara slipped outside again. The moon almost full hung behind a sheet of thin cloud, turning the snow to a dim silver glow. She looked toward the tree line. Something was wrong. The forest, usually a dark wall of trunks and shadows, seemed too quiet. No owl calls, no fox tracks, no rustling branches. Then movement. A flicker of black gliding between snow-laden trees. Another, then 2 more. Wolves. Their silhouettes were distant but unmistakable, moving low, silent, purposeful. They sniffed the wind, pausing occasionally before continuing along the ridge. They were hungry, and they were watching. Ilara felt her stomach clench. Wolves in winter were not unusual. But wolves this close to the village? This early in the season? That meant scarcity. That meant desperation. That meant danger. She backed toward the cottage quietly and shut the door without a sound. A warning at dawn. At breakfast, she told Mara what she'd seen. The old woman's face hardened. Wolves do not come close unless pushed by hunger. Should we tell Joran? Ilara asked. We must. Bren, who had been sipping warm goat milk, tensed. Wolves? Near the village? Yes, Ilara said. I saw 4, maybe 5. He stood abruptly, nearly spilling his cup. We need to fortify the livestock pens and check the southern path. They come from there most often. You will do no such thing, Mara snapped, pointing a wooden spoon at him. Your fingers are still numb. But, Ilara cut him off gently, let me go. I'll bring word. Bren sat, frustrated. Ilara finished her cloak fastening and set out toward the longhouse. Preparing for predators. Joran listened carefully, rubbing his beard. Wolves this early. Bad sign, he muttered. The storm must have buried the deer trails. Hungry packs are bold. What can we do? Ilara asked. We gather stones for torches, Joran said. Burning brands keep wolves away better than blades. And we move animals into the longhouse when storms come. Ilara, he added, tell your grandmother we meet tonight. Everyone. This winter demands more than our hands. It demands our minds. Ilara nodded. As she turned to leave, Mira approached her. You have good eyes, Mira said. We'll need that before long. Ilara blinked. Why before long? Because wolves don't travel near villages alone. Mira's tone was grave. They scout first, then follow with the pack. Ilara swallowed hard. The frost that creaks and groans. That evening the village gathered once more, not for rationing, not for counting, but for planning. Mara stood with a cane in one hand and a clay mug of broth in the other. "Long winters," she said, "push the world into strange shapes. Hungry wolves, snow heavy enough to crush roofs, cold that splits wood beams with cracks like thunder. You must expect it, prepare for it, face it." Joran nodded. "Tonight we assign night watches, 2 people per shift, 1 hour each, carry torches, patrol between the longhouse and the barns." Gasps spread through the room. "Night watch? Against wolves?" someone whispered. "It is necessary," Mara said. Bren, now able to stand fully, stepped forward. "I'll take second watch," he said. Ilara frowned. "Are you sure?" "No," Bren smiled weakly, "but I'll do it anyway." Joran nodded approval. "Ilara, you take third." She blinked. "Me? You've proved yourself, and wolves fear the bold." A few villagers chuckled softly. The tension eased. Night watch was decided. But the hunger moon rises. The moon reached its peak that night, full, pale, enormous. Villagers called it the hunger moon, the moon that marked winter's true beginning. Ilara walked her first patrol with a torch in hand, the flame casting flickering shadows across the snow. The cold pressed against her cheeks, but the steady heat from the wrapped stone under her cloak kept her core warm. The village was silent. Too silent. Barns huddled under snow. Houses looked like beasts sleeping under white blankets. Only the crunch of Ilara's boots broke the stillness. At the far end of her route, she paused near the tree line. Nothing moved. No wind, no branches, no wolves. But she felt something, a heaviness in the air, a waiting. As she turned to begin her walk back, a sound drifted through the night. A single, distant howl. Long, low, hungry. Another answered from the east, then another, from the north. A circle. They were surrounding Ashford. Ilara tightened her grip on the torch. The night had teeth. The winter had begun its trial. And the village would need every scrap of knowledge, courage, and unity to see the dawn. The howl faded into the night, but its echo remained in Ilara's chest like a second heartbeat. She stood completely still, her breath frosting in the air. The torch crackled softly, tiny embers lifting into the breeze before dying against the cold. Deep in the forest, silence returned. But it wasn't peaceful. It was watchful. "Easy," Ilara whispered to herself, forcing her fingers to unclench around the torch handle. "It's just one howl, one wolf." But she didn't believe her own words. Wolves never called alone in winter. She resumed her patrol, trying to keep her steps steady. Snow creaked beneath her boots, loud in the hush of night. Too loud. It sounded like a warning to anything hiding in the shadows. By the time she reached the longhouse, Bren was waiting at the door for his shift. "You heard it, didn't you?" he asked quietly. Ilara nodded. "2," she corrected. "1 from the ridge, 1 from the eastern path. They're moving around us." Bren swallowed and tightened his cloak. He looked steadier than earlier, but faint purple shadows still clung beneath his eyes. "Get inside," he said. "You're done for the night. My turn." "You're sure?" He managed a small smile. "I won't freeze. Besides, they'll expect someone to watch. Wolves prefer weakness." Ilara glanced at his still bandaged hands but didn't argue. She knew pride mattered. Winter wasn't kind to those robbed of dignity. "Be careful," she said. "You too." She passed the torch to him and slipped inside. Inside the longhouse. The longhouse was dim but warm. Families slept huddled close on the raised platforms. Children snuggled beneath wool blankets. Old men snored softly. The fire burned low, but hot stones arranged around its edge leaked gentle heat. Mara sat awake, as if she'd been waiting. "You heard them," she said. Ilara nodded. "They're circling." "Then they're testing us," Mara murmured. "Wolves measure their prey. They learn by watching. What do they want? The goats?" Mara shook her head. "Not yet. They're hungry, but cautious. A hungry wolf will try to take livestock. A starving wolf will take anything." Ilara shivered. "People?" "Children first," Mara said bluntly, "and lone watchers. That's why the torches matter." Ilara's stomach twisted, but she forced herself to sit down beside her grandmother. "We'll be ready," she said. Mara placed a wrinkled hand over her granddaughter's. "I know." Bren's second hour. Outside, Bren walked the patrol path slowly. The torchlight cast uneven circles around him. Every sound made him flinch. The crack of settling frost, the sigh of snow sliding off a roof, distant branches rubbing together in the wind. He tried to steady his thoughts. One step. Breathe. Another step. His breath fogged before him. He watched it rise and vanish into the night. Halfway past the goat barn, he paused. Something felt wrong. The goats were silent. Not restless, not noisy, completely silent. "Hello?" he whispered toward the barn. "Everything all right in there?" No sound. He tightened his grip on the torch and edged toward the door. "Just checking on you," he murmured. "Don't be alarmed." The barn door creaked as he pulled it open. Inside, the goats huddled together, eyes wide, ears pointed. Their bodies trembled, not from cold, but fear. Bren stepped inside, frowning, and the goats suddenly stampeded backward, terrified. "What?" A shape moved behind him. Just a whisper of motion, a shift of darkness at the corner of his vision. Bren spun, heart hammering. But nothing was there, only the door swaying gently in the wind. He forced himself to close it tightly, then backed away. His shift was almost done. He couldn't shake the feeling that something unseen had passed close, too close. When the next watcher arrived, Bren handed over the torch with trembling fingers. "Stay alert," he said. "They're nearby." The dawn of ominous tracks. Morning came slow and dim. Sunlight filtered through thick grey clouds. Villagers emerged from their homes cautiously, scraping frost off windows, brushing snow from doorways. Ilara stepped outside and inhaled sharply. The world felt colder than yesterday, though the air was still. "Look," Bren said from beside her, pointing toward the far edge of the village. Tracks, large ones. The paw prints were deep, leading from the forest toward the goat barn and circling it. Ilara knelt to inspect one. "Bigger than a normal wolf," she whispered. "Much bigger." Mara joined them, leaning heavily on her cane. "That's the alpha," she said. "He's testing your defenses." Bren paled. "He could have gone inside last night." "But he didn't," Mara replied. "Because the goats smelled you. Because you were there." She touched Bren's arm. "Sometimes simply standing watch is enough to turn winter aside." Bren straightened a little. Joran approached with several other men, all grim-faced. "We have to reinforce the barns," he said. "Double bar the doors. Add straw to the walls for extra insulation. Wolves fear fire, so we'll place torches on poles at the corners." "And the night watch?" Alara asked. "We extend it," Joran said. "Wolves attack at twilight and just before dawn. We need double shifts for those hours." Alara nodded. The village adapted again. Work crews formed. Straw was stuffed into gaps between barn boards. 2 men climbed onto roofs to clear snow, making the structures less likely to collapse under sudden weight. Ilara helped Mira secure extra planks over the goat barn door. "If the wolves are this bold already," Mira muttered, "the forest must be barren." Ilara hammered a wooden peg into place. "Then it's not just the wolves who'll go hungry." The faded daylight. By late afternoon, the sky dimmed early winter's way of shortening hope. Mara prepared the evening communal meal, root stew thickened with barley and a dab of tallow. The smell filled the cottage, comforting despite the meager ingredients. Bren helped by crushing dried herbs. "Your hands are steadier," Alara observed. He looked surprised. "Really?" "Yes," she said, smiling. "You're almost fully recovered." "Then maybe I should take 2 watch shifts tonight." Mara snorted. "Don't push your luck, boy." They all ate quietly, grateful for warmth. But as the last spoonfuls disappeared, a loud thump against the outer wall made Alara jump. "What was that?" she whispered. Bren stood abruptly. Mara shook her head. "Not a wolf. Too heavy and too clumsy." Ilara grabbed her cloak and hurried to the door. When she opened it, snow fell inward in a soft cascade. And there, in the drift, stood a man half frozen, his beard coated with ice, eyes wild. It was Thomas. "Ilara Joran wolves," he stammered, barely able to breathe. "What happened?" Bren demanded. Tomas pointed toward the ridge, gasping. 3 of them attacked the wood-gatherers, drove us onto the frozen creek. Joran's still out there." Ilara's blood turned to ice. "How far?" she asked urgently. Thomas swayed. "Half a mile. Maybe less." Mara grabbed Ilara's wrist. "Don't go alone. Wolves hunt in pairs." Ilara nodded. "Bren, help Thomas inside. Get him warm." Bren hesitated. "And you?" "I'm going to find Joran." "Ilara, wait!" he shouted, reaching toward her. But she was already out the door. Into the teeth of the storm. The wind rose again with evening, swirling fine powder into Ilara's face as she ran toward the ridge. The world grew darker with every step. She followed Tomas's tracks until they vanished into the forest shadows. Her torch sputtered in the wind. Behind every tree she imagined movement. A branch cracked somewhere ahead. Then voices. "Hold them back!" Ilara sprinted toward the sound. The frozen creek appeared before her, a wide sheet of ice faintly visible in the gloom. Joran stood at the center of it, swinging a burning brand in one hand, a knife in the other. 2 injured woodcutters crouched behind him, and circling the ice were wolves, 5 of them massive, grey, their eyes glowing eerily in the torchlight. One lunged. Joran swung the brand, smoke trailing behind it. The wolf recoiled, but not far. Ilara's pulse exploded. She raised her torch high and shouted, "Hey!" Every wolf turned toward her. Joran glanced back, surprise flashing in his eyes. "Ilara, get back! The ice!" But she ignored him and ran forward, heart pounding like a drum. The largest wolf. The alpha stepped closer, teeth bared. He was enormous, too large for an ordinary wolf. His fur was matted with ice, his yellow eyes fixed on her torch. She slowed, but she didn't stop. Her mind raced, not with fear, but calculation. Fire first, sound second, space third. She dragged in a breath and screamed with all the force in her body. A raw, echoing roar that shook the trees. The wolves hesitated. Firelight flickered across her face. Joran seized the moment. "Ilara, push them toward me!" She advanced, swinging her torch in wide arcs. The wolves retreated, snarling. Then the ice beneath her gave a loud crack. "Ilara!" Joran shouted. Another crack louder. Time froze. Her foot slipped, and suddenly she was falling. The ice shattered beneath her like glass. The world plunged into black freezing water. Her torch hissed and died. And the last thing she heard before sinking was Joran shouting her name. The cold hit Ilara like a punch to the lungs. Not just cold that killed. It swallowed her whole, dragging her down into a world of black water and shattered ice. The shock ripped the breath from her throat. Her limbs seized, then thrashed wildly. Above her, blurred moonlight shimmered through the jagged hole she'd fallen through. A pale, wavering circle, her only guide. Her hands shot upward, trying to reach it, but her heavy cloak dragged her down. Wool soaked instantly, turning to lead. Her boots filled with icy water. Her fingers stiffened. Her heartbeat slowed as the freezing shock surged through her body. No, not here. She fought, forcing her arms to move. Her palms brushed the underside of the ice-smooth Merciless. Searching, pushing, her lungs screamed. Up! Find the hole! Find the hole! Her hand caught the ragged edge of broken ice. She grabbed it, pulling with everything she had left. Her head broke the surface. She gasped air, but a paw struck the edge near her, spraying slush into her face. A wolf. It snarled, pacing along the rim, its breath steaming in the moonlight. Ilara kicked desperately, trying to pull herself up. The ice cracked beneath her hands. "Ilara!" Joran's voice roared from the left. There was a blur of movement, a torch arcing across the air. It struck the wolf's side in a burst of sparks. The beast yelped and bounded back into the shadows. "Ilara, hold on!" Joran shouted. "I can't," she choked. Her voice was barely sound. Her fingertips were numb. The ice threatened to break again. Then Joran was sliding across the ice toward her, belly low, using his weight to distribute pressure. A rope was tied around his waist, anchored by the 2 injured woodcutters. His torch lay extinguished on the ice behind him, but his knife remained clenched in his teeth. "Take my hand!" he shouted, extending one arm across the broken edge. Ilara tried. Her muscles refused. Her fingers curled weakly, unable to grasp. "I can't feel," she began, but her teeth chattered too violently to finish. "You're not dying today," Joran growled. He reached farther, dangerously close to the breaking edge. The ice groaned beneath him. "Don't!" one of the woodcutters yelled. "You'll fall through too!" "Shut it!" Joran snapped. "I've got her!" He reached again, and this time his hand closed firmly around her wrist. Ilara felt a faint surge of strength. Then the ice beneath her shattered, but Joran didn't let go. "Pull!" he roared. The rope behind him jerked taut. The 2 woodcutters heaved with everything they had. Joran slid backward, dragging Ilara up with him, inch by inch, water streaming from her clothes, her limbs limp. Finally, she broke free of the water completely, collapsing onto the ice beside him. Joran pulled her into his arms and rolled away from the weak spot. The ice cracked again too close, but held. "Stay with me," he whispered urgently. "Stay awake." Ilara's eyes fluttered. Darkness tugged at her. Her mind felt slow, distant, fading. "Joran," she whispered. "Yes?" "Don't let me sleep." "I won't." She closed her eyes, and Joran slapped her cheek lightly. "Ilara, eyes open." She gasped and obeyed. He wrapped his cloak around her shivering body. "We have to move," he told the woodcutters. "Now, before she freezes solid." They nodded, grim-faced. But around them, wolves began to gather again, shadows moving at the edge of the moonlit ice. They had not been driven off. They had simply waited. With a run for safety, Joran lifted Ilara onto his back. She was too light, but he tightened his grip. The woodcutters armed themselves with broken branches and burning scraps from hastily lit torches. 3 wolves prowled forward. The alpha watched from the ridge, a dark silhouette against the snow. "Move," Joran commanded quietly. "Don't run, just move." They edged backward across the ice. Every step groaned. Every breath felt like it cracked their insides. The wolves followed, silent, coordinated. Ilara tried to lift her head. Only her eyes moved. "Behind!" "You," she whispered. "I see them," Joran answered. The moment their boots touched firm snow, he spoke louder. "Now!" They ran. Branches whipped their faces as they tore through the trees. The wolves surged after them, howls splitting the night. Joran gripped Ilara tightly. He could feel her shivering against his back, each tremor weaker than the last. "Stay awake!" he gasped. "Stay with me, Ilara!" Her voice was barely a breath. "Trying!" A wolf lunged from the left. Mira burst from behind a tree and slammed a burning brand into its flank. The creature yelped and veered off. "Joran!" she shouted. "This way!" She led them toward a crude firebreak the villagers had built in autumn. Snow was thinner there, less cover for wolves. Mira ran beside them, swinging her brand in wide arcs. The flames reflected in her fierce eyes. "Don't you dare die on us, Ilara!" she yelled. "I refuse to explain that to Mara." Ilara managed a faint, delirious laugh. Then her body went limp again. Firelight and shadows. They reached the edge of the village. Torchlight blazed from the longhouse villagers standing outside, weapons ready. Sensing the crowd and fire, the wolves stopped at the last line of trees. The alpha watched, eyes reflecting orange. Then he huffed, a deep sound full of promise. He would be back. The pack melted into the forest. Joran stumbled toward the longhouse entrance. "Clear a space!" he shouted. "She's freezing!" Mara appeared instantly furious, desperate, terrified. "Lay her by the hearth! Strip those wet clothes!" Half the villagers rushed to help. Warmth flooded the air. Hands removed Ilara's cloak, her soaked tunic, her boots. Wool blankets smothered her in layers. Heated stones were placed beside her body, not touching her skin, but close enough to radiate steady warmth. Mara pressed her hand to Ilara's cheek. "Open your eyes, child," she whispered. "Don't go deeper into the cold. Come back to us." Her voice trembled for the first time in years. Bren pushed through the crowd, face white with fear. "Ilara!" He knelt by her side and grabbed her hand. "Don't leave," he whispered. "I just found you." Ilara's lips parted. A faint breath escaped. Then slowly, her eyes fluttered open. She blinked at the fire's glow. "Cold," she murmured. Mara let out a shaky exhale. "You'll be warm soon." Ilara looked up at Bren. "You look terrible," she whispered. He laughed, half sob, half relief. "So do you." Joran collapsed onto a bench, exhausted. His beard was frosted white. Mira slapped his shoulder. "You're lucky you didn't die, you stubborn Yorks." He grunted. "Would have been easier." "No," she said. her voice softening. "It wouldn't." The village decides. Hours later, once Ilara was safe and sleeping under Mara's watchful eye, Joran gathered the villagers. "The wolves are bold," he said. "Bold and hungry, and if we don't act, they'll take a child, or a goat, or worse." "We can't hunt them," Tomas said. "Not in this deep snow." "We don't have to," Joran replied. "But we must defend ourselves, build barriers, keep fires burning at night, work in groups, and most importantly, no one goes into the forest alone. Not for wood, not for water, not for anything." Mira stepped beside him. "Ilara almost died. That will not happen again." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Bren stood, voice strong despite his exhaustion. "We face this together," he said. "The wolves, the cold, whatever comes, together." Slowly, villagers nodded. Mara, still sitting beside sleeping Ilara, spoke last. "This winter will test us," she said quietly. "But winter has always tested people. Those who survive are not the strongest. They are the ones who refuse to face the dark alone." Her eyes lifted toward the shuttered windows, where distant howls echoed faintly. "The wolves will come again," she said, "but so will dawn." The night, after Ilara drifted in and out of sleep, fever warmed her cheeks. Her fingers tingled painfully as life returned to them. Through the haze she heard voices, Bren, Mara, Joran, the fire, and beyond them a promise. Footsteps in the snow, wolves circling, eyes watching. But she was alive, and tomorrow she would stand again. Winter had struck its first blow. The village had survived it. But the war of the hunger moon had only begun. The next morning dawned pale and brittle, like a sheet of ice stretching across the sky. Frost clung to the windows in delicate patterns, spirals, feathers, ghosts of frozen breath. The storm clouds had drifted eastward overnight, leaving behind a cold so sharp it felt alive. Inside the longhouse the hearth glowed with a steady fire. Villagers whispered as they checked on Ilara, who slept wrapped in layer after layer of wool. Her skin had regained color. Her breath was slow, but even. She was safe. Mara never left her side. But outside, the village stirred with purpose. For the first time all winter, fear had united them entirely. To the Council of Ashford. As the sun rose weakly, faintly a circle formed outside the longhouse. Men and women huddled close, their cloaks whipping in the morning wind. Joran stood at the centre, resting heavily on a wooden staff. Mira stood beside him, arms crossed, her expression iron. Even children hovered at the edges, silent, understanding in the instinctive way children do that something enormous was shifting around them. "We face a cunning enemy," Joran began. His voice carried through the cold air like a hammer striking iron. "Not a storm, not hunger, but living predators." A quiet murmur rippled through the crowd. "We always had wolves in the hills," said an older shepherd named Hale. "They keep their distance if we keep ours." "These wolves are different," Joran replied. Ilara saw them circling before nightfall. They watched the village. They tested our walls. "And they nearly took her last night," Mira added sharply. "They drove us onto thin ice deliberately. They know our weaknesses." "They're starving," someone whispered. Joran shook his head. "Starving wolves do not coordinate like this. What we face is not desperation. It is strategy." Mara approached, her cane sinking into the snow. "All wolf packs follow an alpha," she said. "A leader stronger, smarter, more ruthless than the rest. The alpha you saw on the ridge last night. That is no ordinary wolf." Joran nodded grimly. "We saw him too," he said. "He wasn't afraid of fire. He didn't attack blindly. He watched." "And learned," Mara added. A heavy silence settled over the gathering. Then Mira broke it. "We fortify the village today. Every hour wasted invites an attack." "How?" someone asked. Joran took a deep breath. "We build barriers of packed snow around the livestock pens. Snow is as strong as stone if compressed tightly. We reinforce doors. We place burning brands on poles. We patrol in pairs." Ingrid, old but sharp-eyed, stepped forward. "And we use sound. Wolves fear noise almost as much as flame." "What kind of sound?" Thomas asked. Ingrid tapped her knitting needles together. "Metal, pots, bells. Anything that rings." "And what of food?" a woman asked. "If wolves prowl near the barns?" Mara raised a hand. "We feed the goats in the early afternoon. Wolves hunt at dawn and dusk. Midday is safest." The villagers exchanged looks. The plan was forming. Hard work, united effort, sleepless nights. But survival rarely allowed anything else. "We begin now," Joran said, "before the sun sets again." Fortifying Ashford. The village erupted into motion. Men shoveled snow into massive piles, stamping and beating it until the surface hardened like stone. Women lashed together wooden barriers, reinforcing weak spots in fences. Children carried stones to be heated for night patrols. Ilara woke briefly and saw all of it through the longhouse door. A village transformed. A wall of snow rising around the barns. Torches placed at intervals along the paths. Bundles of kindling stacked for quick lighting. Pots and pans strung on ropes to create alarm lines. Her heart swelled with pride and worry. She tried to rise, but Mara pushed her back down firmly. "Rest," her grandmother said. "Your body is still fighting the cold." "But what you need," Mara said, "is to get warm enough to stand. The village can handle one day without you." A small voice beside the fire piped up. "We're doing it for you, Ilara." It was Rowan, a shepherd boy no older than 10, his nose bright red from the cold. "For me?" Rowan nodded shyly. "You fought the wolves. Now we fight them too. Together." Ilara smiled weakly. Her fingers throbbed with returning sensation. Her skin still tingled painfully, but warmth crept back into her bones. Maybe by evening, she thought, she could stand again. Signs in the snow. At midday, Bren arrived with Mira and Thomas to check the longhouse defenses. Bren carried a spear. He looked stronger than the day before. Eyes clear, posture tall. "Ilara," he whispered when Mara allowed him close. "How do you feel?" "Like I fell through ice," she muttered. He laughed softly. "You did," she swatted his arm. "Don't be clever." "We found tracks," Bren said, becoming serious again. "Wolves returned sometime before dawn." Ilara's eyes widened. "How many?" Joran stepped inside, snow still clinging to his beard. "More than yesterday." Mira leaned against the wall. 7 sets circling the goat barn. They never approached the houses, but they were close. Ilara raised her head. "Did you see the alpha?" Joran shook his head. "No. He stays hidden until he chooses to show himself." "Like a general," Ilara murmured. "Exactly," Mira replied. Bren lowered his voice. "Joran thinks the alpha is waiting for us to weaken. Another storm? Another accident? Anything that gives him an opening." Ilara's stomach turned. "And we can't strike first," Mira added. "Not with the deep snow. We'd get surrounded." "So what do we do?" Ilara whispered. Joren looked at her with the calm, heavy certainty of a man carrying the weight of many lives. "We survive," he said. "One day, one night, one breath at a time." On the second night watch, the day passed in exhausting labor. By evening, the village looked different-like, a fortress grown from snow and wood. Ilara had regained her strength enough to walk slowly. Mara allowed her to take a short patrol around the longhouse, wrapped in 3 layers of wool. Bren walked beside her, ready to catch her if she wavered. "Cold air stings less today," Ilara said, inhaling deeply. "That means you're healing," Bren replied, "or your body is too numb to notice any more." She elbowed him lightly. "Stop trying to make me laugh." "I can't help it," he said. "You're easier to talk to when you're annoyed." She opened her mouth to retort, but then a sound drifted from the forest. Not a howl, a grunt, low, heavy, close. Bren froze. "Did you hear that?" Ilara nodded. Another grunt. Then the snap of a branch. "Back to the longhouse," Bren whispered. "Now!" They moved quickly but quietly, their boots leaving deep prints in the snow. The village torches flickered ahead of them. Figures on patrol shifted nervously. Mira raised her spear. "Something's out there." Joren stepped forward, scanning the ridge. Then the sound came again. A breath, a massive exhale. Not a wolf's howl, not a deer's call, something heavier. Ilara's hair prickled. "That's not a wolf," she whispered. "No," Joren murmured. "It isn't." A shape moved beyond the tree line. Large, broad, muscular, covered in thick fur the color of ash, the alpha, but not like any wolf Ilara had ever imagined. He was nearly as tall as a man at the shoulder. His coat was mottled with scars. His eyes glowed with intelligence cold, calculating, and his breath steamed in twin jets from enormous jaws. He didn't approach. He didn't hide. He simply stepped into the open, showing himself by choice, a declaration, a promise. Mira's grip tightened on her spear. "Holy gods!" Joren exhaled. "Now we know." The Alpha stared at them, all of them, turning his head slowly, as though counting the villagers, memorizing them. Then he made a sound Ilara had never heard from a wolf. A low, rumbling growl that sounded disturbingly like speech, like a warning sent across species. He turned sharply and padded back into the forest. Gone, but not retreating. Waiting, preparing. The weight of the night. The village didn't sleep. Not truly. Torches burned until dawn. Patrols doubled. Ears strained for every shift of wind, every creak of snow, every breath not belonging to a human heart. Ilara lay awake beside the fire in the longhouse, Mara's hand clasped in hers. Bren sat nearby, sharpening a knife, the rhythmic scrape filling the silence. "What do we do now?" he whispered eventually. Ilara stared into the flames. "We wait," she said, "and we prepare." "For what?" Bren asked softly. Ilara swallowed, her gaze drifting toward the shuttered window where the Alpha's shadow had stood moments earlier. "For the night he decides to come closer. When come he will, because winter was not finished with Ashford, and the wolves were only just beginning. Если хочешь, я продолжу part 11, следующие 2000 слов. The long vigil and the first breach. Вы сказали, продолжай, чат GPT сказал, part 11, the first breach, though 1000 words, original fiction, English. The next 3 days passed with a strange, suffocating slowness. The wolves did not attack, but they did not leave. Their presence pressed against Ashford like an invisible weight. At night, faint howls drifted from the ridge, never close, never far. Just enough to keep every villager awake, listening. Firelight never dimmed, patrols never stopped. Sleep became shallow and fractured. Fear made people quiet. Preparation made them tired. Waiting made them fragile. And winter, always watching, crept deeper into their bones. Lara's recovery. Ilara regained her strength quicker than anyone expected. The villagers said it was her youth. Mara said it was stubbornness. Bren said it was unreasonable recklessness. She smacked him for that. But the truth was this. Ilara refused to lie still when danger waited outside their walls. By the 4th day after her near drowning, she stood unassisted for the first time. Her legs trembled but held. Her breathing no longer stung. Mara fussed over her. "Slowly. You're not made of iron." Ilara shrugged on her cloak. "But I'm not made of snow either." Bren appeared in the doorway, spear in hand. "Good, because we need you outside." Mara scowled. "She needs rest." Ilara tied her hood. "I'll rest when the wolves do." Mara muttered, "Then you'll be resting in your grave." But she did not stop her. The patrol by the ridge Ilara joined Bren and Mira for a midday patrol, the safest time of day, though nothing felt safe anymore. Snow fell lightly, dusting their cloaks. Frost glittered on bare branches. Their breaths rose in little clouds. "Tracks are multiplying," Mira noted, kneeling near the tree line. Ilara crouched beside her. Wolf prints fresh, more than yesterday. A lot more. "They're gathering," Ilara whispered. "Pack behavior," Bren added grimly. "Coordinated." "And the Alpha?" Ilara asked. Mira shook her head. "Not yet seen, but he's out there, watching." Ilara felt it too, an eerie sensation prickling between her shoulder blades, like eyes following her every step. "Let's go farther," Mira said. They advanced slowly, weapons ready, eyes scanning every shadow. The world was muted. Snow muffled sound. Clouds dimmed the light. The forest breathed quiet, steady, and ominous. Then Mira lifted a hand sharply. "Wait!" Ilara froze. Bren tightened his grip on his spear. There, straight ahead, a dark shape crouched beneath a pine tree. Not moving, not breathing, not alive. A deer carcass. Ilara approached cautiously. The animal lay half buried in snow, its ribs exposed, the flesh torn raggedly. But more unsettling was the pattern of the attack. "Not eaten," Ilara murmured. "Not fully," Mira agreed. "Only the soft parts, liver, kidney." "Wolves didn't kill for food," Bren said quietly. "They killed to practice." Ilara's stomach twisted. Wolves were efficient hunters. They did not waste energy. But an alpha preparing for a winter siege? He would. Mira exhaled sharply, rising to her feet. "We need to tell Joran. This changes everything." They turned back toward the village, but halfway home they heard it. A howl. Not like before. Not distant. Not scattered. Close. Then another. And another. Surrounding them. Bren's voice tightened. "They're here." The race to Ashford. "Run!" Mira ordered. They sprinted across the snow, adrenaline blazing through their limbs. Ilara felt the cold air burn her lungs. Branches clawed at her cloak. Snow sank under her boots. Behind them, paws thudding through snow. Panting, snarling. The wolves were coming fast. Ilara risked a glance over her shoulder. 4 wolves barreled through the trees, huge, hungry, coordinated. "Mira!" Bren shouted. "We won't make it." "Yes, we will," she snapped. "Move!" The village gates, simple wooden posts bound with rope, appeared ahead. A patrol shouted and began waving torches. "Hurry!" someone yelled. Ilara pushed harder. her heart slamming against her ribs. A wolf lunged. Bren shoved her sideways just in time. Its jaws snapped inches from her leg. The beast skidded in the snow, spun around, and charged again. Mira hurled her spear. It struck the wolf's shoulder, not fatal, but enough to stun it. "Go!" Mira screamed, grabbing Ilara's arm and dragging her forward. The gates swung open just enough to let them through. Villagers reached out, yanking Ilara, Bren, and Mira inside. The wolves skidded to a stop at the boundary of the torchlight, snarling, pacing, staring, and then a larger shadow appeared behind them, the Alpha. He stepped into view, taller than the rest, fur bristling, breath steaming like smoke from a forge. His eyes locked onto Ilara. Not the village, not the torches. Her. She felt a pulse of ice shoot through her veins. The Alpha growled, low, deep, resonant, calculated. Then he turned sharply, and the pack vanished into the forest. The meeting of fractured nerves. Inside the longhouse, chaos churned. "What were you doing out beyond the ridge?" someone shouted. "Are you mad? They nearly killed you." "They would have if we hadn't seen the patrol signal," people argued, frantic, terrified. Joran slammed his staff against the floor. "Enough!" Silence. "Ilara, Mira, Bren," he said, "tell us what you saw." They explained everything. The deer carcass, the encirclement, the chase. Joran's jaw tightened. "They're growing bold," Mira said. "Too bold." "It's the Alpha," Mara murmured from her place by the fire. "A wolf like that. He isn't driven only by hunger, but by opportunity. He senses weakness. He smells fear. The storm made us vulnerable. The cold makes us slow. He will use this. And now he knows our faces," Mira added. Ilara felt a chill unrelated to the winter cold. "He was looking at me," she whispered. "Yes," Mara said softly. "He remembers you." "Why?" Ilara asked. "Why me?" Mara sighed. "Because you defied him. When you screamed on the frozen creek, you challenged him. Wolves understand strength. And they never forget those who disrupt their hunt." Ilara's throat tightened. "What do we do now?" Bren asked. The villagers looked to Joran. He inhaled deeply. "Now, we prepare for the first breach." A hush fell. "The Alpha will test our walls," Joran said. "He will strike where we are weakest. And when? Not in daylight. Not in calm weather." His gaze drifted toward the frost-rimmed window. "He will come with the next storm." The whispers of snow. That night, clouds gathered like heavy curtains across the sky. The air felt dense, electric. Ilara paced restlessly, sleep impossible. Bren sat sharpening his spear again. Mira checked the bindings on her boots. Joran studied the sky. Mara prayed softly to gods older than the village itself. Ilara stepped outside for a moment of cold air. The torches flickered in the wind. Snowflakes drifted lazily at first. Then more. Then more. A whispering sound reached her ears. Soft, sinister, familiar. She turned toward the forest, and her breath caught. At the tree line barely visible through the falling snow stood the Alpha. His shape almost vanished in the white haze, but his eyes glowed amber and unblinking. He watched her. Ilara's heartbeat thundered. Slowly, deliberately, the Alpha lifted his head, and he howled. Not a warning, not a call, a declaration. The storm answered. Wind howled back, swirling snow in violent spirals. Trees bent. The sky darkened. Ilara stumbled backward. The Alpha's shadow blurred and melted into the storm. He was coming. Tonight. The first breach. The storm struck like a hammer. Snow whipped across the village, thick as wool stuffing. Wind screamed between the houses. The longhouse shuddered under the force. Joran bellowed orders. "Positions! Torches lit! Stay away from the walls!" Mira dashed to the north barrier. Bren took guard at the south. Ilara remained by the longhouse, keeping the fires fed. Lightning cracked across the sky, rare in winter, and terrifying. A deep growl rose beneath the wind. Ilara froze. The goats in the barn bleated, shrieking, terrified. Then, crash! A wall of snow collapsed inward. Wood splintered. Animals screamed. "Ilara!" Bren shouted. "The barn!" She sprinted into the storm, snow stinging her face. Mira joined her, spear ready. Joran followed, shouting for more torches. They reached the barn and saw it. A massive breach carved through the snowbank. Planks hung broken. The barrier was smashed inward as if struck by a battering ram. And inside, a wolf, not the alpha. One of the pack-huge snarling eyes blazing with hunger. It had cornered 3 goats. Ilara didn't think. She lunged.